Christmas Eve 2025 should have been a peaceful night up in the mountains of Southern California. But for the people living in Wrightwood, it turned into a nightmare that unraveled incredibly fast. Just as families were settling in for the holiday, a massive, unseen threat was building right above them, one that would flip their celebration into a full-blown emergency before the night was over. Late on December 24th, a brutal winter storm, fueled by a moisture-packed atmospheric river, started pounding the San Gabriel Mountains. At first, the rain just fell steadily, but soon, it became relentless, completely soaking steep terrain that was already weak from months of extreme weather. What happened next wasn't a slow-moving flood. It was a sudden collapse. The hillsides just gave way. Massive surges of water, mud, and debris rushed downhill, burying roads and forcing authorities to scramble into action immediately. Within just a few hours, Wrightwood's main access routes were totally compromised. Emergency crews were racing against rising water and unstable ground, while entire neighborhoods faced the terrifying reality of being cut off from the outside world. Power outages started spreading, and emergency warnings kept escalating. By the time the sun came up on Christmas morning, the town wasn't just dealing with a storm anymore. They were staring down the consequences of an environment that had been pushed completely past its breaking point. This isn't just a story about heavy rain. It's really about timing, vulnerability, and how fast normal life can get flipped upside down when extreme weather hits. What happened next was a true test of how an entire region handles pressure. The storm that slammed Southern California over Christmas wasn't your typical winter weather system. It was the result of a rare lineup of atmospheric conditions that basically took a massive fire hose of moisture and aimed it directly at the region, and then just kept it there. At the heart of this event was a powerful atmospheric river, a long band of tropical moisture stretching all the way across the Pacific Ocean. When that plume of moisture hit the California coast, it ran into colder air and smashed right into the steep slopes of the San Gabriel Mountains. Those mountains acted like a giant wall, forcing that warm, wet air rapidly upward. That process didn't just intensify the rain, it actually locked the storm in place. Instead of passing through quickly, the system stalled out, dumping rain over the exact same spots over and over again. Meteorologists were recording rainfall rates of over an inch an hour, with peak bursts hitting nearly 2 inches an hour in some places. In less than a day, total rainfall skyrocketed to between 8 and 14 inches across the foothills and higher elevations. Those are numbers that completely overwhelmed what the local creeks, drainage systems, and soil could handle. And the timing made everything so much more dangerous. The heaviest rain fell overnight and into Christmas morning, right when visibility was terrible and most people were indoors or asleep. Every new wave of rain just added more pressure to ground that was already soaking wet, speeding up the runoff and increasing the risk of sudden, catastrophic failures. Forecasters warned early that this storm carried a high risk of flash flooding, but as conditions worsened, it became clear this was more than a flood event. The storm's persistence turned rainfall into a catalyst for widespread instability, setting the stage for destructive impacts that would follow rapidly and with little warning. Long before the first raindrop fell on Wrightwood, the conditions for disaster were already in place. Earlier in 2025, powerful wildfires burned across large sections of the San Gabriel Mountains, stripping hillsides of vegetation that normally stabilizes the terrain. What remained after the flames passed was a fragile and unpredictable landscape. When intense heat from wildfires scorches the ground, it fundamentally alters the soil. A hardened water-repellent layer forms just below the surface, preventing rainfall from soaking in. Instead of being absorbed, water accelerates downhill. This phenomenon, commonly seen in post-fire environments, turns rainstorms into rapid runoff events with devastating potential. As the Christmas storm delivered hours of heavy rain, the burned slopes above Wrightwood and nearby canyons behaved less like mountains and more like funnels. Ash, loose soil rocks, and burned tree remnants were swept into drainage channels all at once. Small trickles quickly merged into powerful debris flows, gaining speed and mass as gravity pulled them downward. Unlike traditional flooding, debris flows move with crushing force. They do not simply fill low areas. They bulldoze everything in their path. Vehicles, fences, and even homes can be shifted or buried within seconds. In steep terrain, There is little time to react once movement begins. Experts describe this process as a cascading failure. Fire weakens the land, rain triggers the collapse, and the topography just amplifies the destruction. Often, by the time emergency responders spot the first signs of trouble, the most dangerous phase is already happening. In Wrightwood's case, this storm didn't create a brand new problem. It activated an old one. The mountains, already scarred and wounded by past fires, simply couldn't hold themselves together anymore. What followed was an unavoidable release of earth and debris that would reshape roads, neighborhoods, and lives in just a matter of hours. It was December 24, 2025. The shift from a holiday inconvenience to a life-threatening emergency happened faster than most residents could even process. What started as heavy rain quickly spiraled into a cascading failure of the roads and drainage systems. By late morning on Christmas Eve, the runoff pouring off the slopes wasn't staying in the creeks anymore. It was racing through streets and front yards, dragging heavy debris along with it. The town's vulnerability became terrifyingly clear as State Route 2, the main way in and out of Wrightwood, started deteriorating in real time. Huge sections of pavement were buried under mud and rock. Other parts were undercut from below, forcing authorities to shut the road down completely. And with that closure, the town was effectively isolated. Emergency alerts escalated rapidly. First, it was just advice to limit travel. Then, it turned into warnings to stay indoors as the debris flows got worse. Firefighters and sheriff's deputies went door to door in the most at-risk neighborhoods, keeping one eye on the slopes that could fail without warning. Residents described hearing a low, continuous roar echoing through the canyons, a sound that just got louder as the runoff sped up. In several areas, the streets became fast-moving channels of brown water, carrying tree limbs, heavy stones, and thick sediment right past parked cars and front porches. Power outages started spreading as mudslides took out the utility lines, leaving parts of the town in total darkness as the rain kept falling. By early evening, the evacuation advisories had expanded to include the entire community. As darkness set in and those access routes were compromised, trying to move around became incredibly dangerous. For a lot of families, Christmas Eve wasn't a celebration. It was spent glued to emergency updates, watching the water levels rise, and just hoping the storm would finally let up. In a matter of hours, Wrightwood had gone from a quiet mountain town to the center of a growing crisis. And remember, this wasn't driven by just one failure, but by a whole chain of conditions that were finally pushed past their breaking point. But while Wrightwood was battling that flooding and isolation, the situation over in Little Creek was deteriorating even faster, and they had far fewer options for escape. Nestled deep inside a narrow canyon, that community is surrounded by steep slopes and connected to the outside world by only a handful of vulnerable roads. As the storm intensified, that geography became a critical liability. Late on Christmas Eve, runoff from the fire-damaged slopes above the canyon all converged into the creek channel. What happened next wasn't a gradual rise in water, it was a violent surge. Mud, rocks, and burned debris all rushed downhill together, turning the creek into a moving mass with the consistency of wet concrete. Residents reported seeing walls of debris reaching 10 to 15 feet high, tearing through access roads and sweeping away smaller structures. Within hours, the main road linking Little Creek to Interstate 15 failed in multiple spots. Entire lanes just collapsed into sinkholes. A bridge near the ranger station suffered heavy structural damage, cutting off emergency vehicle access to parts of the canyon. To make matters worse, power lines and communication infrastructure were knocked out, leaving many residents without electricity, cell service, or any reliable information. Emergency responders were facing extreme limitations. The heavy rain, unstable ground, and near-zero visibility made nighttime rescues way too dangerous to attempt by land. Crews were forced to stage at the edges of the canyon, just waiting for the weather conditions to improve enough to get in. On Christmas morning, a brief break in the weather allowed for a dramatic scene. A helicopter crew managed to pull off a high-risk hoist rescue, plucking stranded residents right out of the floodwaters below. For the people still trapped inside that canyon, the danger wasn't just the rising water, it was the relentless movement of debris. In such rough, confined terrain, there was nowhere for that mud to spread. It could only move forward. Little Creek had effectively become a closed trap, where survival came down to timing, the terrain, and the razor-thin margins left by the storm. By Christmas night, it was obvious that the crisis in Wrightwood and Little Creek was just part of something much bigger. The same storm system continued to hammer Southern California, expanding the emergency from those remote mountain canyons right into the densely populated foothills, valleys, and major cities. Across Los Angeles County, the rainfall numbers were historic. Downtown LA saw more than 6 inches of rain in a single day, and the foothills got hit even harder. Streets that were designed to handle normal winter storms just failed under the sheer volume of water. Storm drains backed up, intersections turned into lakes, and water pooled so fast on the freeways that authorities were forced to shut them down, stranding drivers during one of the busiest travel times of the year. The timing really couldn't have been worse. High tides along the coast actually blocked the runoff from draining into the Pacific Ocean. This created a dangerous backflow effect that flooded low-lying neighborhoods. Major roads, including parts of the interstate and coastal highways, became impassable due to standing water, piles of debris, and sinkholes opening up under the saturated pavement. Emergency teams across multiple counties were pushed to their absolute limits. Fire departments were fielding hundreds of calls, everything from water rescues and trapped cars to downed power lines. To top it off, the wind and debris knocked out power to over 100,000 customers statewide, making the situation even more dangerous as the sun went down and temperatures dropped. Even air travel took a massive hit. Hundreds of flights were delayed or canceled, partly because the access roads to the major airports were flooded, and operations had to slow down for safety. Shelters were opened up at fairgrounds, schools, and convention centers to take in families who had been displaced from these flooded neighborhoods. What started as a mountain emergency had evolved into a massive regional stress test. It revealed just how connected our infrastructure, weather, and terrain really are, and how a single storm can spiral into a widespread crisis. As Christmas Day came to an end, Southern California was left facing the harsh consequences of a storm that completely reshaped the holiday. Although the rainfall started to taper off in some areas, officials made it very clear, this emergency is not over. With the ground completely saturated and slopes still unstable, the danger is going to linger long after the heaviest rain has passed. Meteorologists are warning that even a small amount of rain from future storms could be enough to reactivate the flooding and debris flows. In the higher elevations, there is a new concern. Colder air moving in behind the storm could bring snow. If that snow lands on top of this waterlogged soil, the added weight could trigger delayed landslides days from now, long after the public attention has faded. For communities like Wrightwood and Little Creek, recovery isn't going to be measured in days. We are talking months, maybe years. Roads have to be rebuilt, drainage systems cleared, and hillsides stabilized before life can get back to normal. For many residents, the emotional toll is just beginning. Homes were damaged or lost, and livelihoods were disrupted. That sense of safety that used to define these mountain towns was shattered in a single night. This storm delivered a very sobering message. Extreme weather in California is becoming more complex and more dangerous, especially where wildfire damage collides with heavy rain. Events that we once considered rare are happening with increasing frequency, leaving us with very little margin for error. Authorities are continuing to urge the public to remain cautious. Please avoid flooded or damaged roadways and follow all evacuation guidance. Remember, a lot of disaster-related injuries and fatalities actually happen after the storm passed, simply because people underestimated the lingering risks. If this report helped you understand the realities behind extreme weather events, please hit the like button. This helps us beat the algorithm and ensures this truth reaches more people who need to hear it. And please share this video with your friends, family members, and relatives. And make sure to subscribe for continued breaking news and documentary-style coverage. Preparedness saves lives. Thanks for watching.